I should have known better than to book a midnight train. Business had been lousy lately, and I was desperate enough to grab the last ride out of this forgotten city. A desperate man makes reckless choices. The trip was meant to be my salvation, a chance to turn things around. But instead, I was just dragging myself back home empty-handed. The city had been suffocating, a maze of shadows and failures, and I needed out. The train station, lit with a flickering dullness, was as indifferent as the rest of this place. The platform stretched in both directions, eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you shouldn't be there. My eyes scanned the length of the train. An old, creaking beast, its windows smudged with dirt, barely reflecting the streetlights. The conductor, a hollow-eyed man with a uniform that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in weeks, gave me a curt nod as I boarded. He didn't say a word, just handed me my ticket and moved on down the aisle. I found my way to the last car. It was dimly lit, mostly empty, just the way I wanted it. I needed space to think, or maybe just space to drown in my disappointment without anyone watching. There was a note on the seat beside me, scrawled in a messy hand. Rules for the journey. I almost laughed. Rules on a train like this. But something about the note made me pause. Before I could read it, the conductor passed by, his face drawn and serious. He glanced at the note, then at me, his eyes narrowing. "Follow the instructions," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Don't question them." I nodded, more out of reflex than understanding, and watched as he moved to the next car, his steps echoing against the metal floor. I turned my attention back to the note, smoothing it out on my knee. The paper felt old, almost brittle, and the handwriting was barely legible. The rules for the journey. Do not sit in seat 13, no matter how empty the car seems. If you hear a passenger weeping behind you, do not turn around. The conductor will pass through twice per hour. If he comes through a third time, avoid eye contact and do not speak. If the train stops anywhere other than a marked station, stay seated until it resumes moving. At 2:03 a.m., the lights will flicker. Close your eyes until they stabilize, no matter what you hear. If someone offers you an item, politely decline. Never accept anything. Upon arriving at your destination, leave quickly. Do not look back at the train. I read the list twice, each rule stranger than the last. A chill ran down my spine, but I shook it off. Superstitions. Someone's idea of a joke. Still, I folded the note and slipped it into my coat pocket. It wouldn't hurt to play along, just in case. The train jerked forward, the wheels grinding like they resented the movement. I slouched back into the seat, my eyes fixed on the window. The city lights smeared into streaks and then faded entirely, swallowed by the kind of darkness that didn't care if anyone was looking. Outside, the world was a graveyard of empty fields and dead trees clawing at the sky. A place the maps might have marked once, only to forget the moment the ink dried. My eyes slid shut for a second, just long enough to feel the weight of the day pressing down on me. The train's hum was steady, too steady, like a lullaby meant to distract you from something worse. The car wasn't helping either. Empty seats bathed in dim, sputtering light, every shadow sitting heavier than it should. I opened my eyes again, and my gaze landed on seat 13, just ahead. Empty. The brass number plate gleamed faintly, like it had something to say but didn't dare. Something crawled across my skin, a cold, invisible thing I couldn't shake. I turned back to the window. Outside, the dark clung to the train, smothering everything but my own reflection. The rules in my pocket seemed to burn there, each word scrawled on that scrap of paper louder now than when I first read them. Just a joke, I muttered under my breath, but it didn't stick. Jokes don't leave your stomach twisting in knots. The conductor passed by, silent as a ghost, his eyes landing on seat 13. Just a glance. Then he looked at me, his expression blank, like I wasn't worth a second more of his time. His steps echoed down the aisle, each one sinking deeper into my nerves. I let out a breath, shaky and uneven, my fingers gripping the armrest hard enough to ache. The whole car felt wrong, like I'd stepped into a room where the shadows knew something I didn't. The wheels rattled on, the rhythm too steady to be comforting. I should have been able to relax, but the silence between each clatter felt sharp, almost deliberate. My gaze kept drifting to seat 13, even when I told myself not to. Empty, still empty. But somehow it felt fuller than every other seat on the train. No one else had boarded since we left. No footsteps, no hushed voices, just me and the stillness. But there it was again, that nagging feeling, like the air in the car had weight to it, like something sat just out of sight, waiting. I leaned forward, trying to peer into the far end of the car. The shadows there didn't sit right. They shifted, thick and slow, like they were alive. My stomach clenched, and I turned away fast, my pulse a little too loud in my ears. The window wasn't much better. Outside, the landscape was just black. No stars, no moon. The occasional tree twisted up from the ground, its limbs reaching for something they'd never find. The mundane noises of the train should have been a comfort. The squeal of the wheels, the steady clatter of the tracks. But instead, they just seemed to carve out the silence around me, making it sharper. I loosened my tie, my throat feeling tight, and glanced at the pocket where the rules were stuffed. My fingers itched to take them out again, but I didn't. They were already etched into my mind. And no matter how hard I tried to look away, seat 13 stayed in the corner of my vision. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A muffled weeping, soft and uneven, coming from somewhere behind me. My breath hitched, and my fingers froze on the armrest. Rule number 2 whispered through my head like a curse. If you hear a passenger weeping behind you, do not turn around. I kept my eyes on the window, but my reflection betrayed me. My jaw was tight, my brow furrowed, every line of my face drawn with tension. The noise was faint, almost drowned out by the train's clatter, but it was there. A low, broken cry that cut through the hum like a knife. I told myself it wasn't real. It couldn't be. A long day, nerves, maybe a drink too many before I boarded. Those things could make a man hear all sorts of things. But the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, each sob sharper, jagged, the kind that buried itself in your chest. It was a woman's voice, soft but raw, like she was crying for something she'd lost and couldn't get back. My grip on the armrest tightened until my knuckles went pale. My gaze stayed locked on the window, on the endless dark pressing against the glass. My heart was pounding now, hammering out a rhythm that matched the wheels on the track. The rules kept me frozen. Don't turn around. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. Just a quick glance, just enough to prove there was nothing there. But the paper's warning burned in the back of my mind. I sat there, stiff as a corpse, every muscle screaming to move while my instincts screamed to sit still. Then the weeping stopped. Just like that. Gone, snuffed out like a match. The silence it left behind was worse. It pressed down on me, heavy and smothering, like the air itself had thickened. My throat felt dry. I let out a shaky breath, trying to convince myself it was over, that the worst had passed. My fingers loosened their grip, but I didn't relax. I couldn't. Footsteps broke the silence, steady and unhurried. The conductor, walking down the aisle like a man with nowhere to be. His head was down, his eyes fixed on the floor. No rush, no urgency, just the steady tap of his boots against the metal. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, not daring to turn my head fully. He passed seat 13 without so much as a glance, his face blank, unreadable. When he reached my row, he paused for just a moment. His eyes flicked up and met mine. That look, it stuck with me. It wasn't fear in his eyes, not exactly. Something quieter, deeper. Like he knew what was coming, like he'd seen it all before and stopped caring about how it ended. He didn't say a word, just kept walking, his steps fading into the distance. I realized I was holding my breath again and let it out slow. My chest felt tight, and my pulse was still racing. I closed my eyes, trying to push it all away. The sound, the silence, the conductor's empty stare. Just a train ride, I told myself. Just a ride, and I'd be home soon. But I didn't believe it. Not for a second. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones, in the way the air tasted wrong, in the way the rules wouldn't leave my head. That gnawing unease sank its teeth in and wouldn't let go. I glanced at my watch. 1:45 a.m., the rules had said something about 2:03. The lights, the flickering. It wasn't far off now. My gut twisted at the thought, but I shoved it aside, or tried to. The minutes dragged, each one slower than the last, each one dragging me closer to whatever was waiting for me at 2:03. The train shuddered, a hard lurch that threw me forward in my seat. The lights above me sputtered, dimming for a second before steadying again. My breath hitched, and my eyes darted around the car, expecting something, anything. But it was just me. Me in the empty seats and the light casting shadows that seemed to stretch farther than they should have. I leaned back, trying to calm my breathing. The window wasn't much help. The black outside was thicker now, heavier, like it was leaning against the glass, waiting for a way in. Trees slipped past, their branches twisted like broken fingers clawing at the train as it passed. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels should have been comforting, should have anchored me. But all it did was highlight the silence, that sharp, aching quiet that waited between each sound. My pulse beat in my ears, hard and fast, like a clock ticking down. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The lights flickered again, a stuttering pulse that made my stomach tighten like a fist. I checked my watch. 2:02 a.m. The second hand crawled forward, each tick deliberate, as if mocking me. The lights flickered longer this time, stretching shadows across the car, bending them into shapes that didn't sit right. My fingers twitched against the armrest, the rules burning in the back of my skull. Then it hit. 2:03. The lights died completely, swallowing the car in pitch black silence. For a moment, the only sound was the pounding in my ears. Then it came, a low, drawn-out creak above me. I slammed my eyes shut, the notes warning sharp and clear in my head. Close your eyes until they stabilize, no matter what you hear. I tried to obey. God, I tried. But fear has a way of worming past rules, past reason. My resolve cracked, and I opened them, just for a second. The faint glow of the emergency exit sign was enough to show me what I shouldn't have seen. What looked like a woman clung to the ceiling, her limbs bending in ways that made my stomach churn. Her movements were jerky, like a broken puppet, her joints snapping as she twisted to face me. The face, or what passed for one, floated just above mine, the edges blurred like a bad photo. But the eyes, they weren't eyes at all. Just hollow pits that still managed to cut through me like shards of glass, cold and sharp. The lights blinked out again, swallowing the thing in darkness. My breath caught in my throat, and I shut my eyes so tight they burned. My whole body trembled, locked in place as the sound above me grew louder. The scrape of nails, no, claws, raked across the ceiling, each drag slow and deliberate. A wet crack followed, like bones shifting under too much pressure. It moved closer, each creak of the metal marking its approach. Suddenly, the sound from above ceased entirely, plunging the air into a tense, fragile silence. But then, a new sound emerged. It came from the seat beside me, a soft rustling, like fabric shifting against fabric, accompanied by a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. "You shouldn't have looked." The lights flickered back on. I opened my eyes slowly, and the car was empty. The thing was gone, but the air still felt wrong, heavy and cold, as if something was watching me just out of sight. My hands gripped the armrests, my breath uneven as I tried to stay calm. "Don't look again," I told myself, clutching the note in my pocket like a lifeline. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't gone. It was still here, just outside the light, waiting. Seat 13 was still empty, the number barely visible in the dim light. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and leaned back in my seat, trying to steady my breathing. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over, and I had a feeling it was only going to get worse. My eyes flicked to the door of the next car. Maybe I could move, find another seat, maybe even another set of rules. But the thought felt like betrayal, like abandoning the fragile thread that was keeping me alive. My grip tightened on the armrests, the note burning in my pocket. Footsteps echoed down the aisle. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The conductor, making his third pass. My stomach twisted as Rule 3 screamed in my mind. If he comes through a third time, avoid eye contact and do not speak. I hunched forward, staring down at my hands. The air around me shifted, growing cold enough that my breath misted in the dim light. His presence loomed as he passed, his steps measured, each one slower than the last. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just waited until the sound of his boots faded into the distance. The train jolted suddenly, a violent shake that nearly sent me out of my seat. The lights flickered, sputtering like a dying bulb, and I made the mistake of glancing toward seat 13. It wasn't empty anymore. My chest tightened, a fist clamping around my lungs. I snapped my gaze back to the window, my heart sounding like a war drum. I didn't want to see who or what was sitting there. I didn't want to know. My eyes slammed shut, and I clenched the armrest tighter, the ache in my fingers grounding me. "Follow the rules," I muttered under my breath. It was a chant now, words spilling out of me like a prayer. Just follow the rules. The train rocked on, the rhythm of the wheels steady but unnerving. The presence in seat 13 didn't move. It didn't speak, but I could feel it. Its stare bored into me, unblinking and patient, like it had all the time in the world. The tension in the car was unbearable, a weight that settled on my chest and refused to let go. I peeked at my watch again. 2:30 a.m., just a little longer, I told myself. Just a little longer, and this would all be over. The words were hollow, but I clung to them anyway. Then it spoke. "Take it," the voice whispered. It wasn't harsh or guttural. No, that would have been easy. Instead, it was soft, gentle, almost kind. It came from seat 13, the sound brushing against me like a cold breeze on the back of my neck. Something solid nudged my arm. A small, icy weight pressed into my hand. My fingers twitched, but I didn't dare close them around the object. "No," I croaked, the word scraping against my throat. I tried again, louder this time, my voice cracking. "No, I won't." The cold retreated, taking the weight with it, but it didn't leave me alone. The tension stayed, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. A quiet reminder that the thing in seat 13 wasn't gone. Not really. I squeezed my eyes shut again, trying to block it out. The rhythm of the train filled my ears, the clatter of wheels, the hum of the engine. It was the only real thing left in this nightmare, the only thing tethering me to reality. I focused on it, let it drown out the whispers that still echoed in the back of my mind. The train shuddered again. The lights flickered, and I opened my eyes, unable to help myself. Seat 13 was empty. I scanned the car, my eyes darting to every shadow, every corner, every row. Nothing. The seat was as vacant as it had been when I first boarded. The brass number plate glinted faintly in the light, taunting me. The train jerked to a stop, sudden and final, the kind of motion that rattled your bones. The lights flickered one last time before holding steady, a feeble attempt at normalcy. My eyes shifted to the window. Outside, the platform was barren. No bustling commuters, no signs of life, just emptiness. But it was my stop. I'd made it. I had followed the rules, and I had survived. As I walked away, the whispers lingered. A reminder that whatever haunted that midnight train was still out there, waiting, watching, and that one day it might come for me again.